And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters with Jason Tramm, and thank you so much for joining us for our unique podcast community where we explore the triumphs and challenges of the performing arts world as seen through the eyes of distinguished artists. And thank you so much for helping us grow. We just hit 1,819 subscribers today, and we grow every day thanks to people like you who watch the show. So please remember to like and share our videos. It makes our community grow, and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information when you subscribe. It really means a lot to us. And we have to see our over 263 past episodes, check out our website at www.jasontram.net. Again, that's www.jasontram with two M's.net. We have a great guest today. We have a world music artist, Chris Stevens. He blurs the lines between music and geography, and he plays a collection of lutes from around the world. A multi-instrumentalist like no other, he performs traditional music from China, India, and the Middle East in their true classical style. Exploring connections with the guitar, banjo, each performance offers listeners a voyage across vast lands and distant times. Welcome, Chris.
Wow, that's a mouthful. Thank you.
Taken right from your bio. Sorry about that.
That's great. No, it's very nice to hear. I appreciate it.
Very
Pleasure to be
poetic.
here.
But I love to have world music people on because I always learn
Yeah.
so much. So I appreciate you being here today.
Oh yeah, there's lots to learn. There's lots for me to learn too. you know.
That's the great thing about music is I'm 47. I've been doing this my entire life, and every day I learn something I didn't know before.
Well, I hope there's some of that in here. There definitely is some unexplored territory in these guys behind me.
So yeah, now you're based in upstate New York, not far from Bard College and Red Hook.
Right.
So
That's right.
how did you get into the world music? How did you find this instrumental passion?
It was just kind of. It seems very natural to me, but I've had to come to terms with over the years that from the outside it looks very weird, or very you need some kind of explanation of what you're doing. But for me, it feels very natural and intuitive. So I started playing guitar when I was a kid. Mostly, I started developing an ear for music at a pretty young age. I remember having these breakthrough moments with music, especially around improvisation and solos. So it was like in the normal context of, American 90s radio music, which was
blues rock.
Blues rock, yeah. So the solo always stood out to me, the guitar solo, as this like other kind of music within the song, right? Like the guitar solo is kind of a separate thing from the song, but you can hear that that's mimicking the melodies that you heard in the song. It's kind of singing with the instruments. So just that very basic concept being built sort of paved the way for everything else, So I got into just the natural progression of aging and hearing music. So I got into like jam bands, the improvisational kind of scene. It was really thriving. Oh yeah, Fish, exactly.
I went to college too. I love those.
Yeah. But that kind of blew my mind even more that you can actually have just improvisation for your thing, and that's what everyone loves. That's why they come see you. That's why they, that's kind of your individual stamp. Whereas the song, kind of as a concept, should be the same every time because people, they need to have their expectations met.
There's comfort in that structure, I guess, right? We have to have that structure for the comfort.
Yes. So I was drawn more to the improvisation in the context of structure, and that sort of paved the way for jazz and all kinds of other kinds of music. And then I stumbled across, I was already into the Bela Fleck and the Flecktones, who were like a wonderful, boundary pushing in their own way. So I already had the pushing the boundaries with music is really cool. So, but he did many records with instruments from around the world. So Vishwa Mohan Bhatt on the slide guitar. He's played with Jai Bing Chen, the Erhu players. His stuff with Africa. So that sort of, and Simone Shaheen as well. That introduced me to Water Lily Records, which is the record that Bela Fleck and these world instrumentalists were published through. And so I looked at other catalog and was just like, oh man, this is it. This is the pinnacle. So I heard the sitar on the radio once on my college station and just immediately felt this piece, and like I finally got something deeper because I'd never heard this kind of music before. But I immediately could tell, I could follow along. It plays with your memory and your expectations. And even just hearing something for the first time, you can follow it and predict what they'll do next. You can hear, because it's modal music, you don't have to think about harmony in any way. You're only dealing with one note at a time, really, against another note. So
All those
it was,
sympathetic vibrations must take forever to
yeah.
tune that instrument. I'm always amazed.
Yeah, I can show you. It's quite an acoustic mechanical wonder. um, but yeah,
Anytime you've got a
that was
tradition
sort
that's
of my introduction, was hearing the sitar and making connections with through Bela Fleck's collaborations.
so you start
And
digging in. When did you get your first sitar? Was that your first non-Western instrument?
yeah, the sitar was my first non-Western instrument. This was in the year maybe 2000. So I don't know if you can remember that far back, but that was a different world.
Certainly
Um,
was.
yeah, so eBay was like, whoa!
I
So I
can
bought
buy
a
things on the
sitar.
computer.
Yeah, I bought a sitar off of eBay actually.
You can buy anything.
And
The world comes to your door, right?
that's right, that's right. And I just sort of played along with the records as much as I could. And then, it sort of mimics the progression of the amount of information on the internet. So, like early 2000s, people, there's just more and more stuff available online. And then it was like YouTube, and it's like, whoa, you can look at people, for me, it was like, oh my God, I can now see musicians around the world and not just have to be nearby them.
That's
So,
amazing. So
I looked up sitar players, saw how they hold the instrument. It shows them, the fingering techniques. It shows just everything on there. So that was my introduction to it. Yeah.
So tell us about going from the guitar technique over to a sitar technique. How was it? Was
Oh
it
yeah,
harder? Was it
that's quite a
easier?
leap. The very basic framework of pluckety pluck and frettity fret, that's the same. You're making the sound here and manipulating the sound here. That is what you're doing. That's about all they have in common, But that's a pretty big thing.
Start there.
So the muscle is used to ding, and then with um, your dexterity of your four fingers, so but it's entirely different way of playing music. So it was a huge, huge shift. But like I said, I already could hear it when I heard it for the first time. I could tell that they're only playing one note at one time, and there's all these different subtle little departations into improvisation and then back to a composition. I could tell that they were counting along and then repeating, looping things. So, you're not playing chords. You're not playing multiple things. That you're only playing one note, really. So
It's like the Eastern versus Western philosophy, and I love how that manifests itself in the
it
music.
almost is. Yeah, there's a lot of crossover between other cultural departments. Music is definitely a thread on which you pull, and the whole thing can become unraveled. Yeah.
And obviously, so many Western musicians have been inspired from the Beatles to,
Yeah.
by the Eastern traditions of incorporating some
Right.
of those sounds into the Western canon. So it's, and
Yeah.
of course, Ravi Shankar has made it
Of
incredibly,
course. Yeah.
brought that to our attention as
Of
a
course, yeah,
culture.
he was my first legitimate sitar player that I knew the name of that I ever heard. Yeah, because once I heard it that one time on the radio, I had no idea who that was. I still don't know who it is. But yeah, then I got into Ravi Shankar. A friend of mine in my town I was living in lent me one of the CDs, and I just obsessed over it. I just listened to it so intently with my eyes closed and my headphones just crammed in there, trying to play along. I tuned my sitar to that recording. I can tell that there's certain notes are excluded, so there's 12 notes in an octave. They're only playing 7 of them, so don't even worry about these other notes. So yeah, a lot of it was just figuring it out on my own, and I still have been doing that this whole time. So that was, it's been about 20 years of just starting from nothing.
That's amazing. Would you like to demonstrate a little bit of sitar for us?
Sure. So the first thing that needs explaining is all these pegs, obviously. Like, what are all these knobs? So every peg here corresponds to a string that you can, I'm not sure if you can tell or not, but there's 2 bridges here, 1 and 2. The top bridge goes to your strings that you play with your hands. So that's all just C and G. That's 2 notes. That's all you need to play the sitar is your 2 notes in the background, droning away, you know. And then your bottom strings underneath here. These are the sympathetic resonance strings that play along with you. So that's like this peg here goes to this string. So when I stop playing, it's still echoing. Right. That's because it's like this bridge is long and sloping. So the string goes over it and it actually bounces up against it, creating that like buzzy effect. Yeah. That's something that's quite unique.
It's a gorgeous instrument too. Wow.
Yeah. They put a lot of work into the carving, the details. It's very aesthetically, it's like a sculpture that you play, really. There's many other specialties of the instrument, though. The sympathetic strings, the open droning tuning, and that's the way that the instrument is used to mimic the voice, where you bend the string down. This is the number one thing you must do on the sitar if you play it. If you're just doing this, you're not playing the sitar right. You need to.
I love when I've worked with some Indian violin players who've played with me before, and I'm fascinated how they've applied a Western instrument which came through the British tradition in the Victorian days, and added the ornamentation to the instrument. It's just so interesting to me how we like exchange culture that way.
Right. Anything that can play microtones, you know, theoretically can be applied to Indian classical music. You just have to be able to get, I think the word is glissandi or glissando, you know, in between the notes. You wouldn't want to just go, that's kind of, you can't do that with your voice. So you need to go, yeah, so you can see the frets are actually arched. See how they're not just flat, they're in like an arch shape. That like really increases the amount of space that you can pull because you're pushing down. So there's lots of like engineering and mathematics involved with the sitar.
Well, there's a 1,000 years of instrument construction to put that together, or maybe even more.
Yeah. But as far as tuning it, yeah, it's okay. Once you know these are friction pegs, they are lined with chalk, so they should stay in place. You know, if you got a good sitar. The one that you have to worry about is the one that you pull. That's why you have down here these little guys that you can just kind of adjust. They help you stay in tune. These little beads up here, so you don't have to worry about the pegs. Just a nice little shortcut. You can usually bend up to a fifth. So this is C. That should be a G. That hurts a lot, and you have to be very accurate to get that
strong fingers and good ears.
Yeah, so you got little canyons on your fingertips here that just develops over the years. Yeah. But that's the specialty of the sitar. It's called meaned. It's where when you're oscillating between notes and not just, you know.
And that oscillation is just part of the style. It's part of the singing style too. Whenever I hear Indian singing, is that always microtones.
Yes.
And
it's
exciting.
So many different kinds of them too. You know, there's going from up to down. There's going down to up. There's skipping a note and then going back. So many different ways.
It's so interesting. Like when you look at the Baroque performers, they have very careful ornamentation mapped out and scripted. I guess and you think that Indian classical music, quote unquote, classical music, goes back 1,500 years at least. So we've got so much tradition, and it's amazing to me.
Yeah, Yeah, it is incredible. And the modal framework that they're using, or the melodic framework called raga, this is like what informs your playing, so that you're not really fully improvising. There's certain rules that you follow in order to play a raga. Um, but those, it's just such an amazing thing to explore, because it can be different every time. There's certain moods that carry across different versions, but you should be able to distinguish like between two ragas that use the same notes, even because of the phrases and the rules that they follow. But it's just an incredible system of music that I'm very fortunate to be involved in it. This is such a wonderful
Do you
way to be.
compose? Do you compose on the instruments as well?
I've made a few little tunes that are memorized, but mostly this music is improvised. If anything would be called a composition, it would be like maybe 5 or 6 seconds in length, and then that's what you repeat. It's like your head. Like I'll give it just a little demonstration here of
Sure.
what I'm talking about. So I'll play a part that's memorized, and then I'll play a part that's improvised within, and I'll go back. So the part that's memorized there. And then you're going back to it. You're just playing little fun things that fill up the amount of time that you have left before you get to the end of the rhythmic cycle. So that's how composition exists in Indian classical music. Sometimes they can be longer. I can play a longer one that's faster.
Bravo, it's fantastic. So when we say raga, like usually a raga, I would think like a mode is a scale, but it's more than that in Indian music, right?
Very much so. Yeah. So raga is really a word that goes back to like color, or like a sense, or like some kind of sensory input that your body absorbs and feels, like smell, taste, sight. So try to think of it in terms of that, instead of musical theory and technical descriptions. It's really like an entity that exists within this music tradition, like a personality, or like some kind of thing that you describe that everyone kind of gives the same description of, but it's different every time. And an audience who's educated in the system should be able to hear it, within the first minute at least, and say, "Oh, that's rag, whatever."
Wow.
Yeah. So it's very very loosely defined, but a mode is something else. You can do lots of things with a mode. Yeah.
Just a building block, right?
A raga is actually a little bit more specific, because there would be many ragas that use the same notes. And in order for that to be true, then there has to be another, description.
So Indian music was your first with the sitar, delving into this
Right.
world music phenomenon. What was the what was the next instrument you
My
explored?
next instrument was an oud, this instrument from Egypt. So
I think the oud's the predecessor to the lute, the European lute. Is that correct?
Yes. So the word lute and the word oud are the same word, really. It's the Arabic word for wood, al oud, and the L in al turned into the L of lute. So it's a funny little etymology there with language. You know, the old Romans getting Arabic um,
Wrong.
words, yeah, wrong, you could say. But theirs have frets tied onto it. You know, this is a fretless instrument, but the basic shape, the bowl here, the neck here, it's all pretty much the same. Another crucial difference is that you play with a pick. This is called a risha in Arabic. Usually the lute is played with, you grow your fingernails out and you play it finger style. But I kind of got into Arabic music and um, other forms of music after getting into Indian music, because I had a teacher, an Indian sitar teacher, for a very brief amount of time, Ustad Imrat Khan Sahab, who lived in St. Louis, who's a bit of a legend. He's one of those great maestros of yore that people are very respectful towards, rightfully so. He was very much a living legend when he was alive. But he was very connected with the Persian, Iranian, and Middle Eastern origins of the sitar. The sitar is kind of a mix between indigenous native Indian, like the Veena, like the Vedas and the Ragas that go back, thousands of years, and a mixture with that and the Persian instruments and Arabic instruments that came in the Mughal Empire, so medieval period. So that's where the sitar really comes from. The word sitar is actually Farsi. It's not Hindi or Sanskrit. It means three-stringed instrument. So it has its origins there as well. Maybe 50-50. If you want to say how, but so he was kind of my introduction into Middle Eastern music, and so I hadn't learned that the tar existed yet. Really, I was just looking up Middle Eastern music, and they were playing an instrument like this, so I was like, oh, okay, well that must be the instrument.
So tell us about the playing technique of this instrument. How different is it than sitar and guitar and banjo?
Oh yeah, it's more close to a guitar. In that I'm holding it like this. The guitar came from this instrument. I don't know if you saw that earlier, but in order to play the sitar, you wear this little guy on your finger. This little metal contraption goes over the index finger, and it's the only finger that you use. You just do this. You just go up and down. With this one, you're holding a little nylon pick, and it's kind of a mix between a sitar and a guitar, in that it's tuned a little bit similar to a guitar, where you have fourths and a third. So you're not playing just droning the same two notes over again. You're modulating, you're moving your key around, the octave to the fifth and fourth and second, whatever. But you're kind of holding it, and in your approach is kind of similar to the guitar, and even the same basic chord shapes are there. That's a nice C chord, same exact shape that a guitar player would make to play a C. But the music is entirely unique to Arabic, even specific Arabic regions. Like Iraq is very different from Egypt, which is very different from Morocco. It's a huge, vast swath of land we're talking about, so it's going to be very different. The Turkish oud is built different. It's tuned differently and played entirely differently too. This is an Egyptian style, so I can play a little demo on the oud here, some Egyptian music. by a very well-known Egyptian composer. If you know anything about Egyptian music, then the name Kulthum should be like, whoa, that's like the the Madonna, the ultimate superstar of Egyptian music, and he was her oud player, Mohammed Al Khazabji.
Oh wow.
So there's more than 12 notes in this system. So I think you might find this a little interesting to hear, these microtones that are actually not just little brief oscillations trying to mimic the voice, but they're actually encoded in part of this system. So you might be able to hear this interval as quite unique. It wants to be a major third, yeah, like, but it's a little flat. So,
yeah, it's kind of gives a unique flavor, right? That kind of almost a third.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's so. A cool way to think about that is that since there is no harmony, since there is no,
Yeah, it's monophonic. It doesn't. I'm waiting for the chords to come in, and it doesn't have.
no, there's no chords. But in order to create the tension and resolution that chords create, right? So like the just natural feeling that people get whenever something resolves, like when a chord resolves, they feel relief from the tension of the previous chord. So the way that is done is by resolving two harmonic notes from non-harmonic notes. So this creates a certain dis-ease, and then when you finally resolve it to the home, then you're like, okay, that issue.
Yeah, there's a clear phrase, a very clear phrase structure, and I guess there's all the different articulations, some faster, some. So it's really, really beautiful style.
Yeah, right. And there's their system that's kind of akin to raga is called maqam. Improvised, memorized, these words are kind of blended. You're improvising compositions and also spontaneously creating compositions while improvising. So it's just kind of a blurry area between how to describe what a player is doing. So again, you should be able to hear it. If you're playing for an educated audience, then they'll say, oh, well, what I just played was in Maqam Rast because it uses these notes. So, that phrase right there was just completely improvised, but using those intervals is what makes it be in that maqam. Wow. So, yeah, one of the similarities that they have is their vagueness around how to describe what is going on in the musician's mind. Is he making it up? Is he reciting? Somewhere in between.
Well, I always think about improvisation as being thousands of hours of learning patterns and then kind of until you have your own, just your vocabulary.
Yeah, I think vocabulary is a good use of comparing music to language, especially this kind of music where you're dealing with improvisation. It's very much in the same category as speech.
Do you collaborate with vocalists in these traditions often?
Do I personally? No, I have not. But the vocalist is pretty much an essential figure in all of music, really. But there's also an instrumental aspect of it, which I'm more drawn to. Yeah, I let the instrument do the speaking. It's kind of another language,
That's beautiful, and the instrument's fascinating too. So I love how different they are. So it must have taken,
of course,
when we think performance practice, and you've got to learn like totally different performance practices, and they're so unique and intricate.
Yeah, no, they're each their own project that you could dedicate a lifetime to. People just spend their life playing the sitar, and they never really reach a pinnacle of like the end. I figured everything out, even the old masters, you can tell that improvements are made still up until the end of their long life, So this is really uncharted territory, playing all of these,
I teach
together.
my undergraduates about the birth of I have a Western styles course, and we go through the birth of the instruments, and they all come from other places, and they kind of morph
Right.
over the centuries, and people don't
Right.
realize that everything's always changing in society. Things are always
Of
as we
course.
pass information around, and it's
Oh
it's
yeah.
fascinating to see how that manifests in the
Of
folk music of
course.
people.
Yeah. And it's interesting with these Silk Road instruments because there's such a direct connection between all of them, and really among the same time period and geographic locations. So they all kind of have this common family tree that you can see similarities even between such distant, places as Egypt and China. They both have this teardrop shape because if you go back and trace their history, they are the same instrument.
The lineage is still intact. I love that.
That's right. That's right. And you can look up even more detailed instruments that exist. Not so codified or standardized. More regional variations of instruments in Central Asia, and they look in between these guys. So there's a definite like blending. There's a clear, like you said, lineage with all of these.
That cultural interchange between the trading routes and the spice and the silk,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it brought with it
It's
everything
really
else.
fascinating.
Math.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. The Silk Road. That's where all of these are from. So yeah, they definitely have a direct lineage. It's hard to say who was the inventor of this instrument. It's really just a co-opting and an appropriation of music that came from somewhere else and just happened to land there.
I just find it so fascinating that you've adopted these styles and devoted your life to this from New York State and from the America, and you haven't actually been there. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, well, it's all online. It's possible to just search for these non-English names and musical terms into Spotify or whatever, and you'll get millions of results. It's all out there online. People, are surprised to hear that, but on my website, I have a YouTube playlist of thousands of videos, and it's just people who set up a camera in wherever they live, in Iran, wherever, and they're just playing their instrument. And,
Being that you have a large, you're online quite a lot, and you do a lot of performing online. What's it like when you hear from people from those countries who comment on your playing?
Oh, they love it. Oh, it's
so
a
cool.
delightful experience for all.
That's amazing.
How would you feel if you saw a Chinese person, playing banjo or something? You'd be like, "That's amazing."
Good for you.
I try to stay true to the original traditional style, and be authentic. I don't really deviate too far from canonical recordings, and very structured improvisation within those ideas. Yeah. Some people, make fusions or, play with Western ornamentation or do other, cool stuff. And that's great. That needs to happen in the world, but that's not me. I'm keeping it old school.
OG.
That's right. So let me move on to this instrument just because, in the fairness of time here. This one's from Iran. This is called tar. And this very cool, unique shape is just so, fun to look at.
What does the word tar mean?
Tar means string in Farsi. So you can tell the sitar, guitar. There's even instruments called dotar and setar, which mean two string and three string. So they all owe their origin of their name to this instrument, or at least this language, Farsi. It's covered in a resonant material here. This is like the skin of a lamb when it's born. It comes out in like a sac, a bubble. Not the skin of the lamb itself. It's a secondary byproduct of sheep birth. And you can dry it out and it turns into like a paper. And then you wet it again, and it becomes like this rubbery balloon substance that has this wonderful hollow sound. And it's very sensitive to movement, yeah. It's almost like the world's first whammy bar, back in medieval Iran.
I love it.
So if you just barely push you're getting all these warbling effects. And so that you just rest the ball of your hand on the bridge, and it creates that warbling sound automatically. And so in Iran, there's a similar system to raga and maqam, where it's memorized improvisations, kind of, called dastgah. I'll play a little bit of that on the tar. I'll go through some of the different melodic and rhythmic patterns that exist in Iranian classical music. So there's one that doesn't have any meter at all to it, no beat, no rhythm. It's called Darmad. So that's one way to improvise. You're just kind of outlining the important relationships between notes. That is between the first and the fourth. And just kind of spelling it out, with no rhythmic cycle and no repetition. Oh, I forgot one more important thing about this instrument. Similar to how the oud plays microtones, like that weird third that's not quite major or minor, this one has frets at the placements where those notes would be, so you get that lovely. Whereas this is the major right here, and the minor. There's another one right there. And that exists on the fourth here, and the sixth, and the seventh.
How long have you played this instrument, and where was this one made? Was it made in Iran?
Yeah, this is made in Tehran. I ordered this through an instrument maker that I met on Instagram. He posts pictures of his tars that he makes, and I was like, I'll take one.
That's awesome.
It's very hard to get things from Iran, so they are based in Dubai, and they do all of their business through Dubai and Istanbul, and then they ship them worldwide from there. But it's from Iran originally, made in Tehran. Through the Sheda Music School, which is a well-known organization of Iranian classical musicians, the Sheda School. And yeah, it came. I traced its journey through through UPS.
I'm sure you did.
From Tehran to Dubai to Istanbul, and then to Houston, Texas.
That's fantastic. It's amazing how that the music is one of the things that can unite us in ways that politics obviously can't. That
Right.
so many other things can't. It's like
I
arts.
think, it's exactly right. Usually music is for the people. The real people of the culture are interested in the music. It's very rare that the higher ups and the people who I wouldn't really consider to be part of the people are going to be musicians or supporting, inner collaborations of international musicians and people,
The musicians are making people happy.
Some interesting legislature with music in Iran. It's quite a twisted tale, Female musicians aren't allowed to play with male musicians. They're not allowed to... the makers of this instrument are not allowed to sell tars outside of Iran. That's why it's kind of hard to get these instruments unless you go to Iran or it come from somewhere else. So, it's very, very tight, very tight. Even the music is...
Is there a religious association with this instrument?
Definitely not. No.
Okay. I didn't think there was musical tradition except for chanting.
Islam technically forbids religious or, non-religious music. The drum and the voice are the only acceptable instruments. That's very conservative interpretation of the Quran. It's actually one of the hadiths, but still, it's usually very much excluded from religious.
Isn't that fascinating? Carnatic Indian music? There's obviously instrumental tradition. So interesting how these are different. I look back to the Middle Ages.
It's just I think it's. it in the Islamic tradition, I believe that it's framed as being a distraction, whereas from my perspective, it's a praise. It is a celebration. But different interpretations.
Yeah,
Some
different people, different cultures. It's
That's
fascinating.
right.
It's fascinating to see,
Different.
like, you go back early enough into, the early Christian church, and there were no instruments in church. It was just Gregorian chant, just
Right.
plain song chant, and it
Right.
wasn't until hundreds of years later that they started pour the harp, or they'd bring other instruments into the fold.
Right.
They thought that the voice was the divine order, one, in unison, and it's amazing how that changes over time. So,
Yeah, and in many ways it still is. It's very, very rare that you can get away with just being a pure instrumental thing. People love to have a singer, and rightfully so. I mean, we're linguistic creatures. We don't necessarily always want to be awash in the vague sounds of instruments that we can't directly relate to, and where the meaning is more abstract. So having a vocalist definitely solidifies the emotional content into words, which
what are
is
some of the comments you've gotten from people from various, the ones that stick out as being something that really was inspirational?
yeah, there's been a lot of support. I haven't really gotten any negative comments. I mean, I obviously make mistakes and mess up. I'm not a perfect maestro. Most of the people who can claim to have never messed up are because they were trained since childhood from their father, who was also a musician, and who from their father, who was also a musician. So I'm starting from total scratch here. So I'm very grateful for all the support that I've gotten. I think that's just a direct result of trying to be as authentic as possible and representative of the high art canonical artists. I'm not trying to put a distortion pedal on the thing or anything like that. I think that's a little disrespectful, but people do it, and
It's very American
it's
to mix
different
and match,
approaches.
right?
Yeah,
The
it's
melting
very
pot kind
American.
of.
Exactly.
And it's a different thing entirely. And I think as a classical musician, I spent a lot of time when I conducted romantic music or Baroque music, being within the canon, within a historical band of authenticity that we've kind of trained into our conservatories, and I live with that. But there's also something fresh about the improvisation that you're dealing with in those. But you have to improvise with certain rules and get to
Yeah,
know
it's
the
actually
rules.
tougher. It's actually much harder. Chinese music doesn't have improvisation. They
Really,
they fully memorize their music, or it's written to score. But what they do is have what you could only say is like embellishment or interpretation. Your own personal little take on a piece, but it should be the same every time. So that's another little fascinating tidbit about my instruments, is that Chinese music doesn't have any improvisation in it in any of their systems at all.
I did not know that. That's amazing.
Yeah. There's an instrument called the guqin, which is a very ancient instrument that supposedly had an improvised aspect to it, but it's been lost for thousands of years, and it was never written down. um, it would be my assumption that China also had an improvisational music form similar to raga, daskal, maqam, just because they came in contact, and this instrument came in contact with China in the Silk Road. So, of course, the music system would come as well. But I think there's some cultural components.
And China is such a massive place with so many different cultures within it. It's
Yeah,
probably
and there's many
has
different
multiple.
regional variations in the past. Maybe 100 years ago, each village, each city would have its own version of the pipa, tuned differently, frets in different places, different string and wood materials. Now they're all the same. So there's been a great deal of standardization in the past 100 years of China. There's definitely a lot of westernization going on. In China, they tune to A440.
Huh.
All pipas are tuned to A440 now, and
It's
their frets
a law.
are yeah, exactly. Whereas these other ones are not. These are tuned wherever. They're tuned relative to themselves, you know. The oud, you know, you should be tuning to C, but the sitar, it's somewhere in between C and C sharp. You know, it's not. You don't have to get the tuner out with them. You just have to make sure that if you're going to play with someone else, that they're in tune with you.
You must agree.
Yeah, you must agree. Like the tabla drums, you know, that go with the sitar, those have a pitch, so you have to tune those to the sitar. But yeah, Chinese music is very standardized and memorized, and that's quite unique and maybe a little unexpected for some people. They think that it's, you know, Eastern music, they're all about improvisation. They certainly are in Korea and Japan, in that Eastern Pacific tradition, but not China. There's a lot of memorization. Um,
So tell us about this instrument. How many strings?
yeah, this is called the pipa, Pipa, and so you play it with these picks on your fingers here, and I'll demonstrate why. It's similar to a flamenco guitar, nails going outward. You know, with the banjo, you're plucking inward. With the guitar, you're kind of pinching, plucking together inward. This, you're going out, so you're moving your whole hand out. So I'll give a little technique. It's similar to a banjo roll, where you're playing 16th notes over and over again to get a very fast tremolo effect that, you know, a guitar player would have to hold their pick and go really fast, you know, like that.
Eddie Van Halen style.
Yeah, no, right, exactly. But with this technique, you know, once you get first, you know, practice it for a few years. I say it like it's nothing, but you practice it for a few years, and then it just becomes second nature, and you can relax and play these very fast 16th notes. I don't know if you can see my hand or not, but that's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the fifth on the thumb. So that's called the lun technique in Chinese pipa playing, that which means wheel. So it even shares a similar like concept with banjo rolls and the lun, the wheel technique. So because you're starting with one finger, looping around, and then going back and starting with the other finger again. So I'll play just a very short piece here on the Chinese pipa, and I'll try to play some of the more interesting sounding techniques.
Very beautiful playing. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's kind of stereotypically pentatonic, you know. That's
First,
kind
I
of,
was going to say pentatonic all the way, but interesting styles, and there's also microtones in there
there's
as well.
very subtle little microtones. So the strings are again raised frets, and very loose action on the pipa lets you get all of these cool, you know, bends. That's one of the special techniques of the pipa. To me, it kind of sounds like a chicken or some kind of bird. So yeah, that's kind of the brief intro to the Chinese pipa, and you hold it upright like this, and it's tuned A, D, E, A. So it's got a half step tuning, which if anybody knows, anything about lutes or playing instruments, having two strings tuned a half step apart is quite unusual.
It's so fascinating how these developed separately, but in conjunction with each other.
Right. So yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, the oud and the pipa are technically, if you go back, they're the same instrument, but they started in Central Asia, and once it moved towards the Mediterranean, it became a bass instrument. And when it came to China, it became a very much high-pitched treble instrument. So preference towards one end of the octave is quite an interesting thing to just ponder about why that might be. But that's how it works.
Do you get to collaborate with other instruments and ensembles on these different styles?
I never have. It's quite rare to be able to integrate into some pre-existing thing without, a ton of practice and rehearsals and things. It's more easy to collaborate with percussionists.
Interesting. Are there a lot of percussionists in these styles in your region that you might meet up with?
There's one. there's a very wonderful percussionist that lives up here that plays the tabla. He plays the goblet drum. He plays kanjira. He plays many different percussion instruments. So I'm very glad to have met him. I've met with several other musicians from the Indian music tradition, flute players, violin players, tabla players. But Iranian music, Arabic music, Turkish music, Chinese music, these are quite still rare forms of art here in America. So unless you're in a university in a big city with some kind of ensemble that meets every Friday for rehearsal for their one big Carnegie Hall concert or whatever, it's kind of hard to find people that share this this interest.
Have you been? Are you seeking out other instruments, other styles as you're continuing to go?
Oh yeah, I've got my eyes set on a Japanese shamisen. I think the shamisen will probably be my next instrument. I just need to find a good one and listen to a lot more shamisen music, because these are all related instruments. The shamisen would be, going back through China, through the Middle East, through the Silk Road. So I just want to get the whole family tree, of Silk Road lutes. There are many more. Afghanistan has, 5 or 6 of their own instruments that would be related to my collection so far. The rubab, there's an Afghani setar that is similar to an Indian sitar, but also kind of a Persian instrument. So very interesting little mixes. Eastern Europe and the Balkans have lots of cool instruments too. Ukraine has their harp guitar thing. Greece has the bouzouki, which is cool. So yeah, there's just tons of them. Even Latin America has the charango, and Puerto Rico has its own little lute called the tres, and there's just tons of these instruments. It's almost as if like the basic framework of like, make a sound here, change it up here, pluck it with a thing in your hand. Like that's like, whoa, everybody can do that.
It's been human nature forever, I guess. At least since the Middle Ages.
That's right. So my last one here is this Turkish instrument. This is called balama. And it's kind of a mix between, you can tell it has frets, just like the Persian tar has microtonal frets, but it's got the body of an oud. And it's got these triple coarse strings that give it a very like bright, twangy sound. So I'll play a little bit. I'll play some improvisational style, like Anatolian folk music, and then I'll end it with a little composition.
great piece of music. It's a lot of fun
Yeah,
too. Great
that's
sense of rhythm and kind of moving forward.
yeah,
And
lots of hammer-ons. I don't know if you saw I'm putting my thumb here. This is one of the techniques of having this tiny little neck. You can put your thumb right here. This is do. So they use the solfege system in Turkey. So this is do right here. You put your thumb, perfect little spot. And that's a tune. This part right here, that little lick and all of its little variations, theme and variations, is the composition. And I just opened with a little improvisation in the like classic Anatolian style, which is this mode right here. So this is their microtone right here. It's a little bit sharper than the Persian and Arabic qualities. You can tell the fret's actually not halfway between these two. It's a little scooted down towards the E major, and this is E minor, but it's actually a little bit sharp. So it's the word quarter tone is not entirely accurate. You know, it's not divided in half.
not exactly right. It's close, but it's
yeah, it's close. It's an approximation. You know, sometimes the word neutral is used, like major, minor, and neutral. There's different ways to talk about, you know, where this note actually is. it's played differently in different regions. Even is what I found. If you listen to people from Eastern Turkey, it's very, very sharp, where it's almost E major. But if you listen to like Istanbul coastal areas, it's kind of flatter. So even within one specific region like Turkey and one instrument, there's still so much variation. It's really a never-ending world.
We got some questions. We got a question from the audience here. If you could travel one day, do you plan on traveling to any of these locales to live something, to get out there and join some
I
music?
would love to. I would love to. You know, all of them. I would go to every country. You know, it might be a little hard to get to Iran right now these days.
A challenge.
It's a challenge, but people do it. You know, I think it'd be very cool to go to Iran, especially if I could immerse myself in music somehow there. Play, learn.
The musicians always, I've made music all over the world, and I'm always amazed by how quickly the musicians just, you know, it doesn't matter where you're from. Or we get into the music, and all of a sudden we're at a cafe, you know, having a coffee.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's just amazing.
It just exists in the air. Yeah, you know. Of course, I would love to go to India. That's, you know, just like, who doesn't? It's just a crazy cool place. Yeah, I think it would be cool. You know, I have this like wild imagination dream in my head of just like somehow just being a street musician and just busking everywhere I go with just carrying my instruments. And you know, I think it would be cool to blend in and inevitably stand out in that regard.
An American lutenist abroad. I like
That's
that.
right. That's right. I can see it now.
So where can people go to find out more about you and your music and to hear you play and find out when you're performing?
Yeah, my website, worldmusician.co, is my home base. It's got all of my links to my other social media stuff.
You can find that in the description. Click on the link in the description and check out this fantastic and really fascinating musician who's taking us on a trip around the world from our very living rooms.
Thank you. Maybe I can bring us back home with some banjo here.
Oh, fantastic. Now, have you played the banjo a long time?
Just recently, within the past few years, I've started to take it more seriously. But, you know, being from the Midwest, it's just kind of in the ether, you know. It should come naturally.
Now, where did banjo come from? Help me out here.
Well, it depends on where do you want to draw the line between what a banjo is. This style with a nylon head resonator and a metal circle frame around it, you know, that's from Appalachia. That's from, you know, the South rural areas of America, you know, within the last 200 years. Now, you can see paintings and there's references to in writings of enslaved people having built an instrument similar to one that existed in West Africa called the akonting, which is, you know, one of these kind of lutes. You know, it's an old school lute. It's like made of goat skin and has strings like that. But the one thing that has in common is this one reentrant string. So usually instruments go tuned from lowest to highest in one direction, right? But this string is higher up on top. Similar to the sitar has these strings here that are, tuned higher as a drone. You use it to keep the drone and to keep the rhythm. So that's one thing that makes people think that the banjo came from the accounting. And you look up these old gourd banjos from these reconstructed from paintings, and they're, stretched with goat skin, and they are made of bottle gourds. And it's like, this is obviously an African invention, So, Bela Fleck has talked a lot about that in his Throw Down Your Heart series, that the banjo actually traces its lineage to Africa. And, through the Caribbean, people, were able to recreate using local materials something that, was like their instrument back in home in West Africa. And then it got picked up and, turned into this thing just throughout the years. Really, within the past 100 years, it's been codified as like, this is what a banjo looks like, right? A circle. It doesn't have a gourd back. It doesn't have a goat skin. It's got frets on it. Usually they were fretless too. If you look at the old minstrel banjos, they're fretless. So it just kind of depends on what you want to say is a banjo. Do Segovia and Hendrix both play the guitar? Right. Yeah.
They're always changing.
That's right. But it's got a very long history. It's usually associated with rural white Appalachian culture, but that is very recent. It's actually an African American instrument. If you look back at the old paintings and you read the old newspaper articles, you see that the banjo is actually an African American instrument, right?
Fascinating. So what are you going to play for us?
Anything. What do you think?
Oh, give me a choice. I'm always fascinated how the Appalachian music has so much reels to it, from the Irish reels, from the immigrants coming over and kind of transplanting. I'm always fascinated by that. So,
yeah. Well, I'll play some rolls here on the banjo. A roll is really just a pattern of 16th notes, and you play with 3 fingers, and 16 is not divisible by 3, as you know. So you have to make these syncopated off-rhythm patterns in order for 3 to add up to 16, to fill out a whole measure. So the way you do that is just by alternating strings. There's a huge rule in bluegrass banjo, that you don't play one string with, the same finger twice. You wouldn't really do this. You would use your other finger, because you can be infinitely faster. Just the split second amount of time that it takes to do this is way slower than using another finger. So you just want to be as fast as possible. There's kind of what's called an economy of motion, where you're expending the least amount of energy as possible in order to play as fast as possible. So I'll play a little old bluegrass tune here. This is the Shenandoah Breakdown.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great to get to meet you and through your music and travel the world. And
oh yeah,
you got to come back on and tell us when you got a show coming up. And
that's great.
You do such interesting experiments. I just can't wait to hear where it takes you next.
Yeah, who knows? Like I said, maybe that might be a Japanese instrument in my future. Who knows?
There's a world of great string playing for you, lutenists, to explore.
Yes, there is. It's really never ending. And I'm thankful
Chris, thanks
for
so
that.
much for joining us on Music Matters. Wish you continued success in your musical journey.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Music Matters with Jason Tramm, and thank you so much for joining us on this great show. Please subscribe on YouTube and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics. Like and share our videos, and thank you so much for joining us. And remember, keep music alive.